Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In the early morning hours of June 5, 1960, 4 Finnish teenagers were camping on the shore of Lake Bodom near Espoo, Finland, a popular camping spot about 22 kilometers from Helsinki. Seppo, Boisman, and Teuvo Ylönen were 18. Maila Björklund was 15. Nils Gustafsson was 18. They set up their tent near the water's edge, made dinner, and went to sleep. Before sunrise, someone attacked the tent with a knife. Seppo, Teuvo, and Maila were stabbed and beaten to death. Nils Gustafsson survived with facial fractures and bruising, with no clear memory of the attack. He was found stumbling from the tent by fishermen at approximately 6:00 a.m., covered in blood. The killer, or killers, left no reliable physical evidence and were never identified. 64 years later, the Lake Bodom Murders remain the most famous unsolved crime in Finnish history. The case has gone through 3 distinct phases, each with a different primary suspect. In the 1960s, investigators focused on a local man named Hans Assman, a door-to-door salesman who had been seen near the lake and who was allegedly identified by Gustafsson in a fragmented memory. Assman was investigated but never charged. In the 1970s, a second suspect emerged: Karl Valdemar Gylling, a local man with a history of mental illness who had allegedly confessed to the killings on his deathbed in 1969. The deathbed confession could not be verified, and Gylling was never named officially. And then, in 2004, 44 years after the murders, Finnish police arrested the sole survivor, Nils Gustafsson, then 62 years old, and charged him with the murders of his 3 companions. The 2004 trial of Nils Gustafsson became a national sensation in Finland. The prosecution argued that the pattern of injuries, the 3 victims killed, the survivor uninjured on his face and hands, while the others suffered multiple defensive wounds, was inconsistent with an external attacker and consistent with Gustafsson having killed his companions in a fight before staging the scene. Defense argued that the forensic evidence was misread, that Gustafsson's injuries were consistent with survival of an external attack, and that the prosecution was retrofitting a theory to decades-old evidence. In 2005, the court acquitted Nils Gustafsson of all charges. The case reverted to unknown perpetrator, and there it has remained. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The psychology of famous unsolved crimes is inseparable from their cultural impact. Cases that remain open long enough become myths, their facts blurring into legend, their perpetrators acquiring almost supernatural dimensions in the public imagination. Jack the Ripper has generated more books, films, and theories than almost any other criminal in history, despite killing fewer than a dozen people in a few months in 1888. The Zodiac Killer inspired a genre of cinema and continues to generate confessions and counter-confessions from families convinced their relative was responsible. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero almost immediately after his crime, lionized in country songs and action movie sequels. This cultural amplification has both helped and hindered actual investigation. The fame of a case attracts researchers, professional investigators, citizen sleuths, documentary filmmakers who sometimes unearth genuine leads. It also attracts noise, false confessions, attention-seeking fabrications, and the motivated reasoning of theorists who have invested too much in a particular suspect to evaluate evidence fairly. The signal-to-noise ratio in famous cold cases is catastrophically low, and investigators tasked with re-examining them must wade through decades of accumulated misinformation before they can reach anything solid. Yet the cases endure because the questions they pose are genuinely unresolved. The perpetrator was never conclusively identified. The motive was never established. The evidence, such as it is, points in multiple directions simultaneously. These are not merely historical curiosities, they are open problems waiting for the right technology or the right insight to finally crack them. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Lake Bodom attack occurred between approximately 4:00 and 6:00 a.m. on June 5, 1960. The three victims, Seppo Boisman, Teuvo Ylönen, and Maila Björklund, died from multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. The weapon or weapons used were never definitively identified. The wounds were consistent with both a knife and a blunt object, possibly a rock. Nils Gustafsson was found outside the tent with facial injuries and no memory of the attack. The tent was found folded partially over the victims, suggesting either that the attack had caused it to collapse or that someone had attempted to cover the bodies. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the crime scene contained relatively little usable forensic evidence by modern standards. A blue sweater of unknown origin was found near the scene. It did not belong to any of the four teenagers, and its owner was never identified. Several footprints were found near the tent, but were of insufficient quality for reliable identification. No fingerprints, no hair samples, and no biological trace evidence from the perpetrator were ever identified. The investigation was conducted in an era before DNA analysis was available, and the chain of custody for the physical evidence collected in 1960 is uncertain given the subsequent decades. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. Hans Assman, the first major suspect, was a door-to-door broom salesman who lived near the lake and had been seen in the area around the time of the attack. Witnesses reported seeing a dark-clad figure walking away from the lake shore in the early morning of June 5. Assman was interrogated multiple times and reportedly behaved nervously under questioning. Gustafsson reportedly identified Assman's photograph in a fragmented memory years after the attack. However, Assman denied involvement, and the physical evidence was insufficient to charge him. Assman died in 2004, the same year Gustafsson was arrested and was never officially charged. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the 2004 arrest of Nils Gustafsson came after Finnish forensic experts conducting a cold case review examined photographs and documentation from the original scene and conclude that the pattern of injuries on the victims was inconsistent with the standard scenario of an external attacker. Specifically, they argued that the three victims showed injuries suggesting they had been struck from above while lying down, rather than defending themselves against a standing attacker, and that Gustafsson's relative lack of defensive injuries was anomalous for the sole survivor of a violent external attack. These forensic arguments formed the core of the 2005 prosecution. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the 2005 Espoo District Court trial lasted several months and generated enormous media coverage throughout Scandinavia. The prosecution's case rested primarily on forensic argument about injury patterns and on circumstantial claims about Gustafsson's behavior after the attack. The defense successfully challenged the forensic interpretations, calling expert witnesses who testified that the injury patterns were consistent with a disoriented survivor of a surprise attack, and that forensic science had advanced significantly since 1960 in ways that made retrospective analysis unreliable. Gustafsson was acquitted on all counts. The court found the prosecution's case insufficient to overcome reasonable doubt. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Following the 2005 acquittal, Finnish police announced they would continue investigating the case as an open case with an unknown perpetrator. The acquittal did not implicate a new suspect and left the case effectively back where it had been in 1960. Several amateur investigators and true crime researchers have published analyses of the Lake Bodom case, with theories ranging from a local resident with undocumented psychopathic characteristics to a random itinerant attacker who passed through the area. Finnish police have periodically stated that the case could be solved by DNA evidence if the unknown sweater or other original evidence could be retested, but the condition and chain of custody of the original evidence is uncertain. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the unknown attacker theory, which is the official position following Gustafsson's acquittal, holds that an unidentified person attacked the tent for reasons unknown in the early hours of June 5, 1960, killing 3 of the 4 campers and leaving the sole survivor with no reliable memory of the event. Possible motives include robbery, though nothing of value was taken, sexual motivation, there was a young woman among the victims, or random violence by a psychologically disturbed individual. The Hans Assman suspect remains the most developed specific candidate under this theory, but the evidence is insufficient to identify him definitively. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the survivor-perpetrator theory, which was the basis of the 2005 prosecution, holds that Nils Gustafsson killed his 3 companions in a fit of rage or in the course of some conflict, and then staged the scene to look like an external attack before being found by fishermen. Proponents argue that the injury patterns support this interpretation and that Gustafsson's complete absence of memory is suspicious. The court's acquittal means this theory failed to meet the legal standard of proof, but some forensic observers continue to consider it the most coherent explanation of the physical evidence. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the deathbed confession theory involves Karl Valdemar Gylling, who allegedly confessed to the murders before his death in 1969. If the confession was genuine, Gylling, who had a history of mental instability and was present in the Espoo area in 1960, was the Lake Bodom killer, and the case was effectively solved before it achieved its full notoriety. However, deathbed confessions are notoriously unreliable as evidence. Gylling's confession was never confirmed by any physical evidence, and Finnish investigators who reviewed the claim were unable to establish its credibility. The theory remains a historical footnote rather than a serious investigative lead. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the unidentified blue sweater found near the crime scene is the most tantalizing unresolved physical evidence. Despite extensive investigation in 1960, its owner was never identified. If the sweater belonged to the killer, modern DNA analysis of saliva, sweat, or skin cells deposited on the fabric could potentially provide a DNA profile that could be checked against current databases or used in genealogy investigation. Finnish authorities have periodically stated that they would like to retest this evidence, but uncertainty about whether it has been preserved in suitable condition has prevented a definitive test from being conducted and publicized. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the pattern of injuries on the 3 victims has been analyzed multiple times by different forensic experts and has produced different interpretations, a fact that itself is significant. The prosecution's 2005 experts and the defense's 2005 experts, both examining the same original forensic photographs and documentation, reached opposite conclusions about what the injury pattern implied about the position and origin of the attacker. This divergence of expert opinion reveals the limitations of retrospective forensic analysis of 1960 evidence and explains why the trial could not reach a clear verdict. The injury pattern evidence is real but genuinely ambiguous. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed Nils Gustafsson's stated amnesia about the attack is a contested evidential element. In trauma psychology, complete amnesia for the period of a violent attack is well documented and is not inherently suspicious. Dissociative amnesia in response to extreme violence is a recognized phenomenon. However, the prosecution argued that the specific pattern of his amnesia, complete for the attack itself, but not for the events immediately before and after, was inconsistent with genuine trauma-induced amnesia and suggested deliberate concealment. The defense introduced psychiatric evidence supporting the genuine amnesia interpretation. The court accepted the defense's position. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Lake Bodom Murders officially remain open in the Finnish cold case system. Finnish police have expressed hope that advances in forensic DNA technology might eventually allow the case to be solved if original physical evidence can be located and tested. The case is taught in Finnish criminology programs as an example of the challenges of cold case investigation and the evolution of forensic science. Multiple Finnish authors and documentarians have produced analyses of the case, and it has been the subject of a 2016 Finnish horror film that used the murders as its premise. The acquittal of Nils Gustafsson in 2005 and his subsequent return to private life did not end public speculation about his role in the events. Gustafsson, who has maintained his innocence throughout and who experienced the trauma of a murder trial at age 62 for events that had supposedly been investigated and closed when he was 18, has given very few interviews. His account of the night, which is fragmentary and has remained consistent in its incompleteness across 6 decades, is the only first-person narrative that exists of the most famous crime in Finnish history. 3 people who could have told us more were killed before the sun rose on June 5, 1960. Whatever happened at Lake Bodom that night has been kept secret, whether by the killer who has never come forward, by circumstances that destroyed the evidence, or by the survivor whose memory, for whatever reason, will not recall. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Lake Bodom Murders, Finland's most famous unsolved triple murder from 1960, from the historical record through physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Lake Bodom ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.